In the previous step, we created an application using Spring Initializer for the currency exchange service. In this step, we would try and create a simple service. What we want to do is the port for this application is 8000, right? So that's basically the port that we have already configured in here in application.properties for currency exchange service. We have server.port as 8000. What we want to do is when we hit localhost 8000 and we want to create a service for currency exchange. We want to create a REST service for this currency exchange, and I would want to be able to pass from which currency, from USD to INR, Indian rupee. So I would want to be able to create an currency exchange service, something similar to that. So let's first try and create a simple hard-coded service before we would actually convert it to connect to JPA and retrieve the data back from a backend. What we are trying to get here is what is the conversion factor. If I want to convert a USD, a US dollar into Indian rupees, what is the conversion factor? For example, today, for example, it's around 65 rupees. So 1 USD is 65 Indian rupees. So in the response, there would be from currency is USD to currency is INR, and let's say the conversion multiple is 65. That's the kind of response that we are expecting out of this service. What I'll do is I'll start with creating a simple controller. So we will try and create a simple REST controller. First up, I'll call this currency exchange controller. Let's finish this off. I would want this to be a REST controller. So I'll say REST controller. I would want to be able to send JSON requests and send response in JSON format out. And I'll create a method. The response type for this is what we would call as exchange value. So we'll create a bean for that very soon. So exchange value, and we'll say retrieve exchange value. What would we want this service to be mapped to? What is the URL that we would want to map to this? It's very simple, right? Let's get mapping, and I can put the URL in here. The URL we want to map is, however, the important thing is this is going to be from and this is going to be to. These are path parameters, and if we want to be able to pick up the values in the path parameters, how do we do that? At path variable, and the type of this path variable from is string from, and I would also have a path variable for 2. So what we are trying to define in here is a simple REST service. So we would want to be able to take the input as currency exchange from USD to INR, and what happens? The USD gets mapped to this from variable, INR gets mapped to the to variable. That's cool. We don't really have a exchange value bean yet, so I'll press Control 1 or Command 1 over here, and I'll say create class exchange value and say finish. Now we have a exchange value class in here. Over here we need to have basically at least the minimum ones. So the string from, that's the basic one, and private string to. So from currency to currency. The other ones we would need to have are, for any of the beans we would typically have a ID. Let's add an ID in, and also we would want to get the conversion factor as the output. I'll use big decimal because that's the most accurate form, and I would say conversion multiple. Let's organize the imports, Control Shift O, and right now what we have is a very simple exchange value bean, right? It would be able to say what is the currency from, what is the currency to, and what is the conversion multiple. What I'll do is I'll create constructors. All Shift S generate constructor using fields, and okay, that's cool. So we now have a exchange value constructor, and at a later point in time we will actually convert this to a JPA entity. So I'll create a no argument constructor as well. That would make JPA happy. Other than this, we'll create the default getters. So generate getters and setters and say select getters and say OK. So what we have in here is a very simple bean that can store the values related to an exchange value. So now I can return this bean from the retrieve exchange value. For now, I would just return a hard-coded one. So new exchange value. The first value is the ID. I'll just send in some dummy value as the ID for now. I'll say 1000L, and from to, and I'll say the conversion factor for now is hard-coded. Big decimal dot value of 65. Let's start up the currency exchange service application. Right click, run as Java application. It should start on port 8000 as we saw earlier. Cool, the application has started up, and I'll go to the browser and try and hit the URL. You can see that now when I hit the URL currency exchange from USD to INR, I'm getting ID 1000 from USD to INR, and the conversion multiple is 65. That's very cool. So what we did in this step is created a very simple controller method. What we wanted to expose is a REST service for this. For now, we have hard-coded the exchange value values. We would actually want to get them from a in-memory database, which we will do a little later. For now, we created an instance of the exchange value which can accept an ID from, to, and the conversion factor, and we are returning that value back. Until next step, bye bye.